Welcome to Fear Spiral, the place where reality twists into terror. Here, we explore true-style horror stories, told from the perspective of those who live them. From isolated cabins and desolate highways to haunted dorms and abandoned hotels, we bring you chilling encounters that will make you question what's out there when the lights go out. Every story is real, every fear is personal, and every twist will leave you questioning the safety of your own world. Stay with us, if you dare. In this series, we bring you 10 terrifying real-style encounters, the kind of experiences that make your heart race and your skin crawl. Each story is narrated in first person, from people who live to tell the tale. Though some mysteries remain unsolved. From the icy isolation of winter road trips to the oppressive silence of an empty hotel hallway, these stories are designed to immerse you in fear. Expect unsettling whispers, strange shadows, unexplained movements, and the gnawing dread of the unknown. Turn off the lights, listen closely, and step into the fear spiral.
Real winter road trip horror stories. Lost in the mountains at midnight. I've always loved road trips. There's something about the isolation, the long stretches of asphalt disappearing into the horizon that makes you feel both free and vulnerable at the same time. I'm 27, live in Denver, and a few months ago my friend Tom and I decided to take a winter trip up into the Rockies. The plan was simple. Rent a small cabin in the mountains, escape the city chaos, drink coffee by the fireplace, and maybe do some light hiking during the day. It was December, and the forecast had mentioned snow, but nothing too heavy. We left late in the evening, around 11:30 p.m., after stocking up on snacks, coffee, and gas. The roads were quiet, and the snow was just beginning to fall, coating the pine trees with a soft, cold shimmer. I remember feeling the familiar thrill of leaving the city lights behind, though there was a subtle nagging unease in the back of my mind. For the first hour, everything was normal. The tires crunched against the fresh snow on the asphalt, and our car's heater kept the chill from sinking in too deeply. We laughed, played music, and joked about being mountain men surviving the winter. But somewhere around 12:30 a.m., I noticed the GPS started acting up. The red dot marking our location jumped erratically across the screen, the route recalculating in ways that didn't make sense. "That's weird," I said, squinting through the windshield. Tom leaned over and muttered, "It's probably just the storm messing with the signal." But the snow was heavier now, drifting across the headlights, and the road became narrower, winding sharply through the dense pine forest. The darkness pressed against the car like a weight, and the quiet that had been comforting at first now felt suffocating. Around 12:45 a.m., things started to feel off. I was driving, cautiously hugging the center line, when I saw a figure standing at the edge of the road in the distance. At first, I thought it was a stranded hiker or someone who had slid off the icy road, but as we got closer, my stomach dropped. The figure wasn't moving at all. It was facing the forest rather than the road, standing rigidly as if waiting for something. I rolled down the window, my voice shaky, and called out, "Hey, you okay?" The wind whipped into the car, cold and sharp, but there was no answer. I could feel Tom's hand tense on the seat beside me, and I knew he'd seen it too. When I looked again, the figure was gone. Not behind a tree, not in the snow. It simply vanished. I tried to shake it off as a trick of the light, a combination of tired eyes and blowing snow, but the feeling of being watched stayed. We drove in tense silence, the music turned low so we could hear the crunch of snow under the tires and the whispering wind through the trees. At 1:15 a.m., the road took a steep curve, and I noticed another movement, a shadow flitting between the trees, too fast to be human. I blinked and it disappeared. My heart was pounding. I could feel sweat gathering at my temples despite the cold. I turned to Tom, whose jaw was tight, his eyes darting toward the forest like he expected something to emerge at any moment. By 1:30 a.m., I realized the gas light was on. Panic started to creep in. We were hours from the nearest town in a snowstorm, and something about the forest felt wrong, too still, too alive in its silence. The crunch of the snow seemed to echo, and sometimes I thought I could hear footsteps following us in the drifts, matching our speed and stopping when we stopped. I kept turning my head, scanning the shadows between the trees, and every time my stomach twisted. The isolation felt suffocating, like the woods themselves were watching. Then came the moment that I'll never forget. Around 1:45 a.m., the road ahead seemed blocked. At first I thought it was a fallen tree or a patch of ice. But as we slowed, the shape became unmistakable. A man stood in the middle of the lane, perfectly still. He was wearing old tattered clothing, head bowed as if he were waiting for us to stop. I slammed the brakes, the tires skidding slightly on the ice. Tom shouted, "What the hell?" My body froze. The air felt impossibly cold, cutting through the heater, biting at my skin. My breath came out in ragged clouds. I couldn't see his face. It was shadowed beneath a hood. I tried to swerve around him, but as I did, he slowly raised his head. I swear there was something wrong with the way he moved. It wasn't smooth or natural, more like a jerky puppet motion. My stomach churned. I pressed the horn repeatedly, shouted anything to scare him away, but he didn't flinch. Then, almost impossibly, I noticed two more figures appearing behind him, spaced perfectly in a line, 3 of them, standing silently in the snowstorm watching us. My heart nearly stopped. I floored the gas pedal and skidded past them, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The music blasted now, an attempt to drown out the pounding of my own heart. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, and I could still see them. Motionless, impossibly tall, their forms just barely visible in the snow and darkness. I didn't dare slow down. I didn't dare think. All I knew was that I needed to get out. The next stretch of road seemed endless. Every curve revealed only more trees, more darkness, more snow. The storm was relentless, flakes swirling violently, coating the windshield faster than the wipers could clear. At 2:15 a.m., the forest thinned slightly, and I spotted faint lights far below. A small town or another road. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with paranoia. Every shadow between the trees made me flinch. The figures weren't visible anymore, but I could feel their presence, as if the forest itself had been following us, letting us leave only after we proved we could escape. We eventually made it to a small town, found a gas station, and filled up. The warmth, the fluorescent lights, the smell of coffee and gasoline, it all felt surreal, like stepping back into reality after being trapped in a nightmare. I told the clerk about the figures, about the strange movements, but he didn't seem surprised. He muttered something about strange things that happen in the mountains after dark, and shook his head, pouring my coffee. I wanted to laugh, but the memory of those figures standing perfectly still in the snow made my stomach churn. By the time we reached the cabin around 3:30 a.m., neither of us slept. The heater was running full blast, the fire crackling in the fireplace, but the images of those figures haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see them, tall, silent, waiting in the snow. At one point, I thought I heard soft footsteps crunching in the driveway outside, even though we were alone, and my pulse raced so fast I thought it would burst through my chest. I checked every window, every door, but saw nothing. The snow had piled up silently, untouched, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't truly alone. The next day, when I tried to retrace the road we had taken, the GPS insisted we were on a road that didn't exist. Satellite images showed only dense forest where the asphalt should have been. I showed Tom, hoping he'd have an explanation, but he just shook his head, pale, silent. We never found any evidence of the figures or the road. All I have are the memories, the frozen faces, the unnatural movements, the stillness of the forest around us. Even now, months later, sometimes late at night, I hear the faint crunch of snow outside my apartment window. I swear it's impossible given that I live in the city, but it's there. And sometimes I wonder, were they human? Were they something else? Or did the mountains themselves take pleasure in showing me how small and fragile I really am? Whatever they were, I'll never drive those roads at night again. I'll never forget that frozen, silent waiting in the snow, and I don't think I ever want to. The cabin in the woods that wasn't there. I'm 24, a recent college grad who loves hiking and camping alone. A few weeks ago, I decided to take a solo trip into the northern Maine woods. I wanted silence, isolation, something to clear my head before starting a new job. I planned a short 2-night stay, sleeping in a small rustic cabin I had booked online. According to the listing, it was about an hour's drive from the nearest town, tucked deep in the forest, perfect for someone seeking solitude. I left the town around 3:30 p.m., the sun already low in the sky, casting long shadows over the frosted pines. The drive was winding, narrow, and snow-dusted. I remember the air growing colder with every mile, my breath fogging in the car and the muffled sound of snow crunching under the tires. There was a quiet thrill to being so far from anyone else. It felt like stepping into a different world. I arrived at the coordinates around 5:15 p.m. At first, I thought I had overshot the turnoff. There was nothing but dense forest and a narrow dirt track disappearing into the trees. My GPS showed I was right on target, but when I parked and stepped out, the forest seemed off. The air was unnaturally still, the snow muffling all sound except for the occasional crack of a distant branch. I followed the path as directed, crunching along in my boots until I saw the cabin, or at least what I assumed was the cabin. It was a small wooden structure, obviously old but sturdy, with smoke curling from a stone chimney. Relief washed over me. Finally, a warm fire, a roof over my head. Solitude. Perfect. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and smoke, and I could feel the chill seeping into my jacket. I stoked the small fireplace, listening to the logs crackle. Around 5:45 p.m., I heard a faint thump on the roof like someone walking above me. My heart jumped. I was alone. The cabin was one story. I chalked it up to an animal or snow sliding from the roof and tried to ignore it. I unpacked my bag, set out my supplies, and made myself a cup of tea. The light was fading outside, the shadows growing longer, and I felt that familiar mix of excitement and unease that comes with being completely alone in the woods. By 6:30 p.m., the unease had grown into full-blown tension. I noticed strange marks outside, footprints in the snow leading away from the cabin, but they weren't human. They were tall, elongated, almost animalistic, and they circled the cabin in ways that made no sense. I debated calling someone, but there was no cell signal, not a single bar. The isolation felt heavier now, pressing down on me with each creaking sound of the old cabin. Around 7 p.m., I thought I heard whispers outside. At first, I assumed it was the wind, but the soft, sibilant tones seemed deliberate, almost forming words I couldn't make out. I froze, listening, my tea growing cold in my hands. I whispered, "Hello?" and waited. Silence, then the faintest scrape of something moving across the snow. Night fell quickly, and with it, the darkness in the forest became suffocating. At 9 p.m., I tried to shake off my growing fear by reading, but every time I looked up, the shadows outside seemed to shift unnaturally. My fire flickered, casting distorted shapes across the walls. Around 10:15 p.m., I heard the thump again, this time on the door. I froze, heart hammering. Slowly, I whispered, "Who's there?" There was no answer, but the sound repeated, soft and deliberate, like someone testing whether I would notice. I grabbed a flashlight, creeping toward the door, and shone it into the forest. Nothing. Just dark, silent trees and the snow glinting in the moonlight. By 11 p.m., panic had set in. Every noise made me jump. The wind scraping against the cabin, the creak of old wood, even the drip of melting snow. I tried to call out again, "Is anyone there?" But my voice felt swallowed by the thick darkness outside. Then I noticed movement, a shadow shifting in the corner of my eye. When I turned, there was nothing, but the feeling of being watched intensified. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it over the faint whistle of the wind. Around 11:30 p.m., I finally decided to go outside to see the footprints. I wrapped my coat tight and stepped into the snow, flashlight sweeping across the ground. The footprints were gone, but the air felt wrong, charged, heavy, almost electric. I shook my head, telling myself it was nerves, just nerves. Around 12:15 a.m., the horror began. I heard the door creak behind me. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand, but no one was there. Then faintly I heard a whisper directly behind me. I couldn't make out the words, but it was close, too close. I bolted inside, slamming the door and locking it. My heart felt like it would explode. I grabbed my phone, hoping to use it as a flashlight if necessary, but there was no signal. Every shadow inside the cabin now seemed alive, stretching toward me, and I felt like I was shrinking in my own space. Around 12:45 a.m., I swore I saw a face at the window, pale, distorted, staring. I ran to the door, threw it open, and the snow was empty. The trees swayed in the wind, the moonlight reflecting on untouched snow. Nothing, but I could still feel it, watching, waiting. The next 2 hours were a nightmare. Every sound, the cracking of the firewood, the whistle of the wind, the faint creak of the floorboards made me jump. I huddled by the fireplace, flashlight in hand, and listened. Then, just as I was beginning to convince myself it was all my imagination, I heard a slow, deliberate knock on the cabin wall. Outside, somewhere in the darkness. My mind went blank. I whispered, "Who's there?" The forest remained silent, but I could feel eyes on me, shadows shifting just beyond the firelight. I didn't sleep that night, not a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the shadowed figure outside, still pale, waiting. By morning, around 6:30 a.m., I dared to step outside. The snow had fallen heavily, covering any tracks from the night. The forest was silent, serene in a way that was almost cruel after the terror of the night. I packed up immediately, my hands shaking, and started driving back down the dirt track. I noticed that the path I had taken the day before seemed longer, winding differently as if the forest itself had shifted overnight. When I checked my GPS, the cabin's location didn't exist. Satellite images showed nothing but dense forest. I tried to rationalize maybe the listing was fake, maybe I had taken a wrong turn, but the details were too vivid, too real. Even now, weeks later, I can't shake the memory. Sometimes, late at night, I feel the same oppressive weight of unseen eyes, and I hear faint whispers, barely audible, as if the forest itself is calling me back. I don't know what I saw, whether it was a person, a group of people, or something else entirely. I only know one thing. That cabin wasn't on any map, and whatever haunted it didn't want me there, but it wanted me to know it had been watching. I don't go hiking alone anymore, and the memory of those silent, snow-covered woods is burned into my mind. The scariest part? I keep dreaming about the cabin, and every time the door creaks open, the shadows reach out and the whispers are louder, and I know without a doubt that it's still out there, waiting. The motel room that watched me, I'm 30, a freelance photographer who often travels alone for work. A few months ago, I was driving through rural Oregon late at night, trying to get to a client's shoot the next morning. It was December, the roads slick from a light drizzle, and the sky was a black void above. Around 2:15 a.m., I realized I was too tired to keep driving safely, so I decided to stop at the first motel I saw, a small, run-down place on the side of Highway 138, its flickering neon sign the only source of light in a stretch of darkness that seemed endless. I didn't care about reviews or appearances. All I wanted was a bed and a lockable door. I pulled into the empty parking lot and noticed the place was almost deserted. The neon sign buzzed and hummed, casting a sickly red glow over the cracked asphalt. A thin man in his 50s appeared at the office window as I got out of the car. His face was pale, gaunt, and he moved slowly, almost deliberately, like he was conserving energy for something I didn't understand. He handed me the key without much conversation, barely acknowledging my questions about Wi-Fi or breakfast. Room 7. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew and bleach, with the occasional trace of smoke. My heart was already uneasy, but I told myself I was just tired. The room was small, nothing more than a bed, a desk, and a TV mounted awkwardly in the corner. The walls were thin, papered in faded yellow floral patterns that made the space feel more oppressive than cozy. I set my bag down and started reviewing my photos from the day, trying to focus on work. Around 2:45 a.m., I noticed something odd. The TV was off, but the static screen seemed to flicker slightly as if someone were moving behind it. I shook my head, blaming the poor wiring. I heard a faint creak from the ceiling above me, probably the building settling. Around 3:00 a.m., I went to brush my teeth and noticed the door slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it. My pulse quickened and I double-checked the lock. It was fine. I muttered to myself, telling myself it was the wind, but the unease lingered. When I returned to the bed, I noticed the reflection in the small mirror above the desk. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but I swear I saw a shadowed figure standing in the doorway behind me. My heart stopped. I spun around, nothing. The door was closed, the hallway empty. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, that the exhaustion was making me see things. By 3:30 a.m., the tension became unbearable. Every little sound, the faint hum of the heater, a drip from the bathroom sink, even the distant rumble of tires outside, made me jump. I tried to sleep, curling under the thin blanket, but I kept hearing soft shuffling in the room, almost like someone pacing just beyond my field of vision. My phone was on the nightstand, but there was no signal. I felt trapped, like the room itself was pressing in on me. Around 4 a.m. I heard it, a soft, deliberate knock on the wall beside the bed. 3 knocks, slow, almost intentional. I froze, gripping the blanket, staring at the wall as if expecting someone to step out. Then came a whisper, barely audible. "Get out." My blood ran cold. I whispered, "Who's there?" The room stayed silent, but the oppressive feeling didn't leave. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it across every corner. The shadows shifted unnaturally. It was as if the light made them aware and they recoiled just out of the beam's reach. At 4:30 a.m., my fear turned to terror. I noticed the window curtains moving, though the rain was steady outside with no wind. A dark figure pressed against the glass, just standing there, motionless. I froze. I couldn't move. The face was obscured, but the posture, the way it leaned slightly, was wrong, uncanny. I bolted to the door, throwing it open. The hallway was empty, silent. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, humming like a living thing. I ran down the stairs and out to my car, rain soaking through my clothes, and didn't stop driving until the neon sign was miles behind me. Even after leaving, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Every time I glanced in my rearview mirror, I thought I saw a shadowy figure in the back seat. At first I tried to rationalize tiredness, paranoia, but the images in my dreams were the same. The same figure standing silently in the dark room, watching me, waiting. Weeks later, I returned to the area to check the motel. It was gone. The road stretched empty, nothing but forest and black asphalt. I asked locals about it. They insisted there was never a motel there. I can't explain what happened. Whether it was a person, some malevolent spirit, or just the building playing tricks, I don't know. But the memory is vivid. I still feel the eyes on me when I lie in bed at night, the soft whisper just beyond hearing. Sometimes when I'm driving late at night, I see that faint, flickering red light in the distance and my heart jumps. I don't think I'll ever forget that room, and I don't think I'll ever stay in a motel alone again. The late-night hiker who followed me, I'm 29 and an avid backpacker. I've hiked dozens of trails across the U.S., many of them solo. I've always found peace in isolation. The quiet hum of the forest, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the feeling of being completely disconnected from everything. But last autumn, I had an experience that completely changed the way I see the wilderness. It was early October, the air sharp and cold, the trees deep in their transformation, gold, rust, and fire red. I was hiking through the Olympic National Forest in Washington, planning a 2-day solo trek before winter snow made the trail inaccessible. The first day went smoothly. I started around 10 a.m., reached my campsite by sunset, and built a small fire. The forest was stunning. Tall evergreens that seemed to touch the sky, mist hovering low to the ground, the scent of pine and damp earth thick in the air. When the sun went down, the woods fell into that eerie, muffled silence you only experience far from civilization. I sat by the fire, eating from a pouch of instant soup, listening to the faint crackle of the flames and the occasional hoot of an owl. Around 10:30 p.m., I decided to turn in. The air had dropped to near freezing, and the stars were like pinholes in black velvet above me. I zipped up my sleeping bag and tried to sleep, lulled by the rhythmic whisper of the wind through the trees. But around 2:30 a.m., I woke up suddenly. There was a sound outside my tent, faint, deliberate footsteps crunching through the leaves. My body went rigid. I held my breath, listening. At first, I thought it might be a deer or a raccoon, but the steps were too heavy. Human. My heart started hammering. I reached for my flashlight, careful not to make noise. The footsteps stopped just outside the tent. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, my breath coming in short bursts. Then silence. Long, heavy silence. I waited, frozen, for what felt like minutes. Then the sound of slow breathing, close, right outside the thin nylon wall separating me from whoever was out there. "Hello?" I croaked, my voice trembling. No response. Just that slow, steady breathing. I switched on my flashlight and shone it at the tent wall. The beam caught the faint outline of someone standing there. A tall shape, perfectly still. I fumbled for my knife, heart slamming in my chest, but before I could unzip the tent, the shape moved. Fast, slipping out of the light. The sound of footsteps retreated into the darkness, fading until the forest went silent again. I sat there, paralyzed, for hours. Every rustle of wind made me flinch. I didn't sleep at all. When dawn finally broke around 6:45 a.m., I stepped outside. The ground was wet with dew, the cold biting into my face. I looked for footprints. They were there. Large, boot-shaped prints leading from the trail straight to my tent, stopping less than a foot away from where I'd been lying. The tracks then veered off into the trees. I followed them for a while, but they disappeared after about 30 yards, swallowed by the undergrowth. I should have packed up and left right then, but I told myself it must have been another hiker. Maybe they'd gotten lost. The thought comforted me enough to stay for my planned second night. I hiked most of the day, snapping photos, trying to shake off the morning's unease. By evening, I'd reached a new campsite deeper along the trail, near a small stream. I set up my tent, built another fire, and cooked dinner. The forest felt quieter than the night before. Too quiet. Around 8:30 p.m., I noticed something strange. Across the stream, maybe 50 yards away, was a tree line. I thought I saw movement there, like someone standing among the trunks. It was hard to tell in the dim light. I pointed my flashlight across the water, but the beam only caught branches and shadows. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me. At 10 p.m., I finally crawled into my tent. I kept my flashlight beside me, the knife under my pillow. I must have drifted off because the next thing I remember was waking suddenly to the sound of splashing. Someone or something was walking through the stream. I froze. My watch read 2:27 a.m. My entire body went cold. The splashing stopped, replaced by slow, deliberate footsteps moving through the grass toward my tent. My breath hitched as I strained to listen. There was no mistaking it this time. Someone was approaching. I heard the faint scrape of a zipper. My tent zipper. I sat bolt upright, knife in hand. "Who's there?" I yelled, my voice shaking. The movement stopped. Silence again. I could hear only my heartbeat and the wind whispering through the trees. I waited for a response, but none came. Then slowly I heard it. The faintest sound of breathing again, right outside. I thrust my flashlight toward the sound. Through the tent fabric, I could see the shadow of a figure crouching low, as if peering in. My blood went ice cold. "Get away!" I shouted, unzipping the tent violently and shining my light out into the darkness. No one. Just trees and the mist over the stream. I stepped out, shaking, sweeping the light in every direction. And then I saw it. On the other side of the fire pit, half hidden behind a tree, someone was standing. Tall, wearing a hood. Perfectly still. Watching, I screamed in raw animal panic and lunged back into the tent, grabbing my bag. I didn't even bother to pack properly. I shoved my gear in, ripped the tent stakes out, and ran for the trail. Flashlight beam bouncing wildly through the trees. I didn't stop running until my lungs were on fire. Around 4 a.m., I stumbled onto a ranger access road. I collapsed there, gasping, shaking uncontrollably. My flashlight was dying, the beam flickering weakly in the fog. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard footsteps again. Slow, steady, measured. I told myself it was my imagination. I forced myself to keep walking until I reached a ranger station just after sunrise. When I told the ranger what happened, he looked concerned but skeptical. "Could have been another hiker," he said. "Or a hunter. People get turned around out here all the time." But when I showed him the photos on my camera, one of them captured accidentally when I'd taken it off my neck in a panic, his face went pale. In the background of the shot, near the edge of my firelight, was a tall man in dark clothing standing perfectly still among the trees. The ranger didn't say much after that. He made a quick call on his radio, then told me to wait inside the station. A few hours later, another ranger drove me back to my car. They said they'd send someone to check the area. I left that place and never looked back. A week later, I received a call from one of the rangers. He told me they searched the site but found nothing, no footprints, no signs of another person. My campsite was undisturbed except for my tent, which they found neatly reassembled near the stream. Someone had put it back up. That detail still haunts me. Someone, or something, had followed me through those woods, stood over me while I slept, and when I fled, calmly rebuilt my tent like they were waiting for me to come back. It's been months now, but I still wake up at 2:30 a.m. most nights. My heart races, my body drenched in cold sweat. I hear the sound of footsteps outside my apartment window sometimes, soft, deliberate, pacing back and forth. I tell myself it's city noise, that it's just my mind replaying the fear, but deep down I know better. There's a rhythm to those steps, a slow, patient rhythm I'll never forget. And every once in a while, when I scroll through the photos on my camera, I see that image again, the tall figure in the shadows. But sometimes, I swear he's a little closer than before. The house at the end of Maple Hollow Road, I grew up in a quiet town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and nothing truly bad ever seemed to happen. Or at least that's what I used to think. When I was 22, a few friends and I stumbled into something I still can't explain. Something that changed the way I see the dark, and what might be waiting inside it. It was late November, bitterly cold, and most of the leaves had fallen. I was home for Thanksgiving break after my first year of college, catching up with my two best friends, Ryan and Jacob. We'd all grown up together, spent summers exploring the woods and back roads outside town. One night, while sitting around a small bonfire in Ryan's backyard, someone brought up the old Hendricks house, a 2-story farmhouse that had been abandoned since the late 80s. Everyone in town had a story about it. Some said a family was murdered there. Others said the father went missing and the rest just vanished overnight. Kids dared each other to go inside, but nobody stayed long. The property sat at the very end of Maple Hollow Road, surrounded by overgrown trees and a rusted wire fence. Ryan suggested we go check it out, just to see it for ourselves. I laughed it off at first, but the idea got stuck in my head. By midnight, we were driving down that narrow country road, headlights slicing through fog that hung low like smoke. The air outside looked thick enough to breathe. The road was silent. No houses, no streetlights, just the sound of gravel crunching under the tires. When we reached the end, the car's beams caught the faint outline of the house, tall, crooked, its windows black and hollow. We parked about 50 yards away and stepped out. The air smelled like wet leaves and decay. My breath came out in visible clouds. The wind was sharp, carrying a faint metallic tang, like old blood and rust. We walked up the dirt path, flashlights shaking in our hands. The wooden gate to the yard hung off one hinge, groaning as Ryan pushed it open. "Man, this place looks worse than I thought," Jacob muttered. The house was 2 stories tall, its white paint long peeled away, exposing gray, splintered wood beneath. The front door hung slightly ajar. I could see a long, dark hallway inside. There was no sound, not even wind through the cracks. We stepped in. The floorboards groaned loudly under our boots. The smell hit us first: mold, rot, and something else. Something sour that made my stomach turn. The air felt heavy, like the house hadn't breathed in decades. Our flashlight beams cut through thick dust, catching cobwebs strung across the corners. We moved through the entryway, our lights sweeping over faded wallpaper and broken picture frames. At the end of the hall stood a staircase leading up, its railing half collapsed. To our right was a living room, overturned furniture, shattered glass, and a single armchair facing the window as if someone had been sitting there waiting. "Let's check upstairs," Ryan said. His voice was low, but the sound still felt too loud in the silence. We climbed carefully, each step creaking like a warning. Upstairs, the hallway was narrow, the walls warped with moisture. There were 3 rooms. The first was a bedroom, a rusted bed frame, a moldy mattress, and a child's toy lying in the dust. A small red truck with one missing wheel. The second room was a bathroom. The mirror above the sink was shattered, shards still hanging from the frame. When my flashlight beam passed over the bathtub, I froze. The porcelain was stained dark brown, the color of dried blood. "Jesus," Jacob whispered. "Probably just rust," Ryan said quickly, though his voice didn't sound convinced. We moved to the third room, the master bedroom. The door was half shut. When I pushed it open, a cold draft swept past us like the air itself had exhaled. The room was mostly empty except for an old wardrobe against the far wall. The door to it was open just a crack. I can't explain why, but every instinct in me screamed not to go near it. Something about that wardrobe and the way it leaned slightly forward, the darkness inside it, felt wrong. Ryan noticed my hesitation and smirked. "Scared, man?" he teased, walking toward it. "Don't," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. But he grabbed the handle anyway and pulled it open. The door groaned, and for a moment there was nothing inside, just blackness. Then something fell out, a small folded piece of paper. Ryan bent down, picked it up, and read aloud. It was a child's drawing, and stick figures, 5 of them, standing in front of what was clearly this house. But what made my stomach twist was the last detail. One of the figures was scribbled out entirely, black ink gouged deep into the paper. "That's creepy," Jacob said quietly. We didn't stay much longer. The air felt colder by the minute, our breath fogging thicker. Before we left, I turned for one last look at the wardrobe. The door was slightly wider open now, but I could have sworn no one touched it. We got out, laughing nervously, trying to shake it off. The moment we stepped back onto the porch, I heard it. The faint sound of something moving upstairs. A long, slow drag like furniture being scraped across the floor. We froze. Ryan shone his flashlight toward the second-floor window. Nothing. Then, just as he was about to turn it off, a shape crossed behind the curtain, a tall human silhouette. "Run," I whispered. We bolted. None of us looked back until we reached the car. My hands were shaking as I jammed the keys into the ignition. As we sped away, I caught one last glimpse of the house in the rearview mirror. There was someone standing in the upstairs window, watching. We didn't talk much on the drive back. It felt like the air inside the car was still cold, like we'd brought something with us. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2:40 a.m. I woke to a soft sound, paper rustling. I turned on my lamp, my heart hammering. There on my desk was a folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was the same drawing Ryan had found. But this time there were only 4 stick figures and one of them was scribbled out. I didn't go back to sleep. The next morning I called Ryan and Jacob. Ryan didn't answer. When Jacob picked up, his voice was hoarse. He said Ryan hadn't been at home that morning. His mom had gone into his room and found his bed empty, his phone still on the nightstand. The police searched for weeks, but they never found a trace. A few days later, I went back to the house alone. I don't know why. Maybe guilt, maybe curiosity. The fog was thicker this time, the air colder. When I stepped inside, it felt different. The walls looked darker, the air heavier. Upstairs in the master bedroom, the wardrobe door was wide open. Inside was Ryan's jacket, the same one he'd been wearing that night, and on the floor another piece of paper. This time there were 3 stick figures left. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was back in my car, gasping for air. I never went near Maple Hollow Road again. It's been 7 years now. Jacob moved out of state. I still live in Pennsylvania, but I take a different route to work every day to avoid that road. Last week, though, I found something outside my apartment door, folded neatly, sitting on the doormat. It was a drawing. 2 figures left. The driver who wouldn't pass me. I drive a lot for work. I'm a sales rep for a logistics company, which means long late-night drives between states are nothing new to me. I've been doing this for almost 10 years now, and I've seen a lot of weird things on the road, but nothing that compares to what happened on Highway 61 one freezing night in February, about 5 years ago. It was around 11:45 p.m., and I was heading back from a client meeting in Iowa, driving toward St. Louis. The stretch between those 2 points is long and empty, just miles of farmland, gas stations every 50 miles or so, and almost no lights once you leave the towns behind. That night the weather was brutal, snow flurries blowing across the windshield, the road slick and silent under the tires. My wipers kept up a steady rhythm, thump, 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 barely keeping up with the falling snow. I had the radio on low, an AM talk station, faint static humming beneath the voices, just enough background noise to keep me from drifting off. Around 12:30 a.m., I realized I hadn't seen another car in almost half an hour. That wasn't unusual for that area, but something about the stillness that night made the empty highway feel different, heavier. I stopped at a small rest area around 1 a.m. It was one of those places with 2 vending machines, a few picnic benches, and a single flickering lamp over the parking lot. The bathroom door was chained shut, a handwritten "out of order" sign taped to it. The air was freezing, the kind that burns your lungs when you breathe in. I stretched my legs, grabbed a soda from the machine, and got back in the car. That's when I saw the headlights in my mirror, 2 distant white orbs cresting the hill behind me. I didn't think much of it. I started the engine and pulled out onto the highway again. The headlights followed, steady and slow. For about 10 minutes they kept their distance, like maybe 5 or 6 car lengths behind me. Then gradually they began to close the gap. I expected the car to pass, but it didn't. It just stayed there, close enough that its high beams filled my mirrors, washing the interior of my car in bright white light. I tried tapping the brakes a little, a signal for them to back off, but they didn't respond. The light stayed fixed behind me, unwavering. I flipped my mirror up to block the glare. "All right, buddy," I muttered, "just go around." But they didn't. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Every turn, every hill, they followed. I could see the outline of a dark sedan behind the headlights, maybe black or dark blue, but I couldn't make out the driver. I tried changing lanes once or twice, but they mirrored my movements perfectly. By 2:10 a.m., I was starting to get nervous. My hands were slick with sweat despite the cold. The snow was falling harder now, swirling through the beams of my headlights. The road stretched endlessly ahead, two thin lanes cutting through the white darkness. Finally, I spotted a sign. Rest area, 2 miles. I decided to pull over and let the car pass. I slowed gradually, flipped on my blinker, and turned into the rest area. To my relief, the headlights continued down the highway, disappearing into the dark. I exhaled hard, my whole body unclenching. I parked near a lamppost and killed the engine. The silence was absolute, just the faint hiss of wind against the glass. I sat there for a minute, trying to calm down, telling myself I was just being paranoid. Then, in my rearview mirror, 2 headlights appeared again, at the far end of the exit ramp. My stomach dropped. They'd turned around. I watched, frozen as the car rolled slowly into the rest area, its headlights sweeping over the lot. There were no other vehicles, just me. The car stopped about 30 feet away, engine idling. The lights stayed on, blindingly bright. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. After what felt like forever, the driver's door opened. A figure stepped out, and tall, wearing a long coat. I couldn't see their face. They stood there for a moment, staring straight at my car, then began walking toward me. That broke me out of my paralysis. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it, praying the car would start. It sputtered once and twice and then roared to life. I slammed it into drive and shot back onto the highway, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. In the rear view, I saw the man sprint back to his car. Within seconds, those headlights were behind me again. I floored it. 70, 80, 90 mph. The road a blur beneath me. But no matter how fast I went, the car stayed right on my tail. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my hands shaking violently on the wheel. For miles, we flew down that empty highway, the snow whipping past like white fireflies. Then, as suddenly as it began, the lights vanished. I looked back on nothing. The road behind me was dark, silent, empty. I didn't stop until I hit a small town about 40 minutes later. I pulled into a gas station and parked under the fluorescent lights. My hands were trembling as I stepped out, gasping cold air, half expecting those headlights to appear again at the edge of the lot. They didn't. I went inside, trying to look normal. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, gave me a wary glance as I poured myself a cup of coffee. "Long night?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, trying to steady my voice. "There's someone out there, on the highway, a dark sedan. Been following me for miles," she frowned. "You're not the first one to say that." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Couple truckers mentioned it last week," she said. "Said some guy's been tailing cars on this stretch of 61. They said he runs you off the road if you stop too long. Nobody's caught him yet. Cops never find anything when they go looking." I stood there staring at her. "You're serious?" She nodded slowly. "They call him the Midnight Driver. Been happening for years, off and on, always around winter." I didn't know what to say. I stayed there another hour, too scared to get back on the road. When I finally did, dawn was breaking, pale light spilling over the snow-covered fields. I made it home without seeing another car. For weeks after that, I couldn't drive at night without glancing in the mirror every few seconds. Every pair of headlights behind me sent my heart racing. Eventually, the fear faded, at least enough for me to get back to work. But last December, almost exactly 5 years later, it happened again. I was driving a different route this time, Highway 30 heading out of Chicago. It was snowing, late at night, the roads empty. Around 1 a.m., I saw headlights appear in my mirror. 2 perfect white orbs, distant but steady. I told myself it was nothing. But as the miles passed, they drew closer, matching my every move. When I turned onto the exit for my hotel, they did too. I pulled into the lot, parked, and sat there staring into the mirror. The car idled a few spaces away. Through the falling snow, I could just make out the shape of the driver, tall, wearing a long coat. I locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grab my phone. I dialed 911, explaining what was happening. The operator told me to stay put. Officers were on their way. While I waited, the car's headlights flicked off. I couldn't see anything now. Just the snow falling, the faint hum of my own engine. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. In my side mirror, a figure walking toward me. By the time the police arrived 10 minutes later, there was no one there. Just a set of footprints in the snow, leading up to my car door and stopping right beside it. The officers took my statement, but I could tell they didn't believe me. They said they'd review the security footage. I called the next day to ask what they found. The woman on the line hesitated before answering. She said the camera showed my car pulling in, headlights behind me, and then nothing, no second car. No person, just me, sitting there.
The guest in room 109. I work in corporate marketing, which means I travel a lot. Conferences, presentations, late-night meetings in cities I barely remember the names of. I've stayed in dozens of hotels over the years. From luxurious downtown towers to cheap roadside motels that smell like bleach and cigarettes. But one night, during a work trip to Cleveland in 2019, I stayed in a small mid-range hotel that I'll never forget. Everything about that night felt wrong from the start. Though I didn't realize how wrong until it was far too late. It was mid-November, cold rain coming down in sheets. The kind of night where even the air feels gray. My flight had been delayed twice, and by the time I landed and picked up my rental car, it was close to midnight. I was exhausted, hungry, and ready to collapse. The hotel, the Brentwood Inn, was about 20 minutes from the airport, tucked off a quiet road near the interstate. Nothing fancy, just 3 floors, about 50 rooms, and a dimly lit parking lot. The front desk clerk was an older man with thinning hair and a polite but distant expression. His name tag said Frank. Long day? He asked as he slid my keycard across the counter. Something like that. I said, forcing a tired smile. You're in room 109, he said. First floor, down the hall to your left. I nodded, thanked him, and dragged my suitcase down the hallway. The carpet smelled faintly of mildew and lemon cleaner. The lights flickered slightly, giving off that cheap fluorescent hum. I passed a few closed doors, rooms 101 through 107, but the hallway was silent. Except for the faint hum of a vending machine at the far end. Room 109 was at the very end of the hall. Beside a door marked emergency exit, I swiped my card. The green light blinked, and the lock clicked. The room was small but clean, a double bed, dresser, TV, tiny bathroom. The heater in the corner rattled to life as I set my bag down. I kicked off my shoes, turned on the TV for background noise, and collapsed onto the bed. My plan was simple: eat a snack, shower, and sleep. But about 15 minutes later, as I sat scrolling through my phone, I heard something. A faint thud from the wall behind the bed. At first, I thought nothing of it. Probably someone next door dropping their luggage. But then it happened again, a slow, deliberate knock. 3 times. I froze, listening. Silence. I tried to laugh it off. Thin walls, I told myself. I went to brush my teeth, the sound of running water filling the tiny bathroom. When I turned off the tap, I heard it again, 3 soft knocks, same rhythm. Same wall. I put my ear against it. Nothing. Just that heavy hotel silence. It was around 1:30 a.m. when I finally turned out the lights. Rain still pattered against the window, the heater buzzing softly. I must have dozed off because I woke up suddenly around 2:40 a.m. to the faint sound of talking. At first, I thought the TV had turned itself on. But the room was dark. The voices were muffled, a man and a woman, low and steady, coming from the room next door. I rolled over, annoyed. Some people have no sense of time, I muttered. But then something about the tone caught me. They weren't arguing, but the man's voice sounded strained, whispering fast, urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but the rhythm made my skin prickle. I checked my phone. 2:47 a.m. I decided to call the front desk. Maybe they could ask the guests next door to quiet down. Frank answered on the second ring. Front desk. This is Frank. Hey, sorry to bother you, I said. There's a lot of noise coming from the room next to mine. I think it's 111. Can you ask them to keep it down? There was a pause. What room are you in, sir? 109. Another pause. Longer this time. Sir, he said carefully. There's no one in 111. My mouth went dry. What do you mean? That room's been empty for 2 weeks. Renovations. We haven't checked anyone in there. I sat up. Well, someone's in there now. I can hear them talking. I'll send someone down to check, Frank said quickly. Stay in your room, okay? He hung up before I could respond. I sat in the dark, staring at the wall. The voices had stopped. The rain outside had turned to wind, rattling the window. A few minutes passed, then a soft knock, not on the wall this time, but on my door. 3 slow knocks. Mr. Frank? I called, hesitating. No answer. Hello? Silence. I grabbed the small hotel pen from the nightstand, the only thing remotely like a weapon, and crept toward the door. The peephole showed nothing. The hallway was empty, dimly lit, the vending machine humming softly at the end. I almost opened the door, but something stopped me, a flicker of movement in the corner of the peephole. Someone was standing just outside the frame, pressed against the wall, out of view. My chest tightened. Whoever it was, they were trying to stay hidden. After a long moment, I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, moving away. I stayed frozen until I heard another sound, a door closing down the hall. I backed away, locked the chain, and sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding. After maybe 10 minutes, the phone rang. I jumped, nearly dropping it. It was Frank again. I checked 111, he said, his voice uneasy. Door was locked, no one inside. I even checked the log. The keycard reader hasn't been used in over a week. Then who the hell was at my door? I whispered. I don't know, sir. I'm coming down there myself. Don't open your door for anyone. The line went dead. I sat there, gripping the phone, every nerve in my body screaming. A few minutes later, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Slow, deliberate. I looked through the peephole again. It was Frank. Same gray sweater, same tired face. I opened the door a crack. He looked startled. Sir, didn't I tell you not to open the door? I frowned. You said you were coming down here. His expression changed, confusion, then something close to fear. Sir, I never left the front desk. My stomach dropped. I slammed the door and locked it again. Frank's voice continued, muffled. Sir, what's going on? But his voice wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from behind the wall. I stumbled back, trembling, staring at the spot where the sound was coming from. The same wall I'd heard knocking on earlier. Sir? The voice repeated, calm and deliberate. Open the door. I couldn't move. The voice wasn't muffled anymore. It was clear, close. Like someone was standing right behind the headboard. Whispering through the drywall, open the door. Sir, I grabbed my bag, didn't bother to zip it, and ran. I yanked open the door, sprinting barefoot down the hallway. The lights flickered as I passed, buzzing overhead. I didn't stop until I reached the lobby, gasping for air. Frank, the real one, stood behind the desk, his eyes wide. What happened? He asked. I tried to explain, words tumbling out between breaths. He paled, glanced toward the security monitors and froze. What? I asked. He didn't answer. I came around the counter to look. On the screen, the hallway outside my room was empty, but the door to 111 was wide open. We went down there together, flashlights in hand. The door to 111 hung ajar. Inside, the room was stripped bare. No bed, no furniture, no lights. Just cracked walls and a concrete floor. We started to leave, But then I noticed something scratched into the drywall near the shared wall with my room. I crouched, shining the flashlight closer. It was a word, carved over and over again, messy and deep. Stay. We left immediately. I checked out that night, drove 3 hours to another hotel, and didn't sleep until sunrise. A few days later, I called the Brentwood Inn to ask if they'd found anything. The number was disconnected. I tried searching online, nothing. No record of it ever existing. But sometimes when I stay in hotels for work, I still hear it. Faint knocks on the wall behind the bed, always 3, and always around 2:40 a.m. The strange roommate. When I started college in the fall of 2018, I was like most freshmen, excited, nervous, and desperate to make a good impression. My school was a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania, tucked between endless pine forests and rolling hills. It had a cozy, peaceful atmosphere that made me feel safe, at least. At first, I was assigned to Redwood Hall, one of the older dorm buildings on campus. Built sometime in the 1950s, it had creaky floors, narrow staircases, and the faint, constant smell of dust and detergent. Most of the freshmen lived there, and it was always noisy until nighttime. When everything went eerily still. My roommate's name was Evan. He moved in a day before I did, so when I arrived with my parents, most of his stuff was already unpacked, neatly folded clothes in drawers, a laptop on the desk, and a few black and white photos pinned to the corkboard above his bed. He was quiet when we met, polite, soft-spoken, almost too polite. He looked a bit older than the typical freshman, tall, thin, with short black hair and sharp features. There was something distant about his eyes, though, the kind of emptiness that made me uncomfortable even when he smiled. Still, I brushed it off. College is full of weird people, right? The first few days were fine. We had different class schedules, so I didn't see much of him during the day. When he was in the room, he mostly kept to himself, reading, writing in a small leather notebook, or staring out the window for long stretches of time. It was around the second week that things started feeling off. One night, I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to a faint sound whispering. At first, I thought it was someone in the hallway, but it was too close. It was coming from inside our room. Evan's bed was across from mine, and in the dim glow of the streetlight outside, I could see him sitting up. His back was to me, and he was whispering quietly to someone. At first, I thought he was on the phone, but when I sat up and looked closer, I realized there was no phone in his hand. "Evan?" I said quietly. He froze. Slowly, he turned his head toward me, his eyes wide open, pupils huge in the dark. "What?" he said flatly. I swallowed. "Who are you talking to?" He stared for a long moment before replying. "Just dreaming." Then he laid back down, turned away, and didn't move again. I lay awake until sunrise. The next morning, he acted completely normal, or at least his version of normal. He didn't mention the incident, and I didn't bring it up. But after that night, I started noticing little things. Sometimes, when I came back from class, I'd find him sitting perfectly still on his bed, just staring at the wall. Not reading, not scrolling his phone, just sitting. Once, I walked in and caught him writing something in that leather notebook. He snapped it shut the second I looked his way. Another time, I woke up to the sound of soft scratching. It was coming from under his bed. When I asked about it the next morning, he said he must have been moving in his sleep. But that didn't explain the marks I found. Long, jagged scratches on the underside of the wooden bed frame. By mid-semester, I was barely sleeping. Every night, I'd wake up between 2 and 3 a.m. Always to some faint sound, whispering, footsteps in the hallway, or a soft clicking noise that I could never trace. The worst was the smell. It started one weekend when Evan went home for what he said was a family emergency. By the second night he was gone. The room began to stink, a faint metallic odor like rust or blood. I cleaned the trash, checked the sink, even pulled out the mini fridge. But the smell was coming from his side of the room. More specifically, from under his bed. I knelt down and shined my phone flashlight underneath. Something was wrapped in a piece of black cloth, maybe a shirt or a towel. The fabric looked damp. I hesitated, then used a pencil to lift the edge. Inside were small bones. At least that's what they looked like, gray-white, clean, arranged in neat rows. My heart stopped. They were too small to be human, but they didn't look like leftovers from a meal either. More like animal bones. When Evan came back 2 days later, the smell was gone. So was the cloth. That night, he finally spoke more than a few words. "Did you touch anything on my side of the room?" he asked quietly. I froze mid-bite of instant noodles. "No, why?" He stared at me for several seconds, too long. Then he smiled. "Good. I like things where they belong." After that, I avoided him as much as possible. I started spending more time in the library or crashing in friends' dorms. But every time I came back to grab something, I'd find something slightly off. Once, my toothbrush was wet even though I hadn't been there in 2 days. Another time, my pillow was flipped over. And my phone charger, which I always left plugged in by my bed, was neatly coiled on Evan's desk. I began to think he was going through my stuff. One Friday night, I came back late after a party. Around 1:15 a.m., Evan wasn't there, which was rare. I sat on my bed, scrolling my phone, when I heard the doorknob rattle. It was slow. Deliberate, not someone trying to open it, but testing it. I turned off my phone light and froze. After a few seconds, the knob stopped moving. Silence, then faintly, I heard a whisper through the door. "Are you awake?" It was Evan's voice, but there was something wrong with it. A strange, gurgling tone, like he was speaking through water. I didn't answer. After about a minute, the sound of footsteps moved away down the hall. When I woke up the next morning, the door was unlocked. I confronted him that afternoon when he came back. "You came to the room last night," I said. "Why?" He looked at me blankly. "I wasn't here. I heard your voice." He smiled again, that thin, unsettling smile. "No, you didn't." Something in the way he said it made my skin crawl. That night I decided I'd had enough. I was going to request a room transfer first thing in the morning. But around 2:40 a.m., I woke up again, to whispering. It was closer than before. When I opened my eyes, I realized why. Evan was standing in the middle of the room, facing my bed. He wasn't moving, just staring. The streetlight behind him cast his face in shadow, but I could see the faint glint of his eyes, wide, unblinking. My voice cracked. "Evan, what are you doing?" He didn't answer. Then he tilted his head slightly to one side and whispered, "You shouldn't have looked under my bed." My heart stopped before I could move. He walked backward, perfectly straight, slow and silent, until he reached his bed. He climbed in, pulled the blanket over himself, and lay still. I didn't sleep. I sat up all night, staring at his outline under the blanket, listening to the faint sound of him breathing. The next morning, I went straight to housing services and demanded a room change. They looked at me like I was crazy but finally agreed to move me out by the end of the day. When I came back to pack my things, Evan was gone. His side of the room was completely empty. No clothes, no photos, no notebook. I assumed he'd been reassigned too, until my new roommate mentioned something a week later. "You mean the guy from Redwood?" he asked. "Yeah. They said he withdrew from the semester. Family emergency or something." I wanted to leave it at that. But one night, curiosity got the better of me, and I looked him up online. Social media, student directory, anything. There was nothing. No student record, no photos, no mention of anyone named Evan in our freshman class. A few days later, I ran into Frank, one of the maintenance guys, cleaning in the Redwood basement. He'd worked there for over 20 years, When I asked if he remembered a student named Evan from my floor, he frowned. Room 214? I nodded. He looked uneasy. Yeah, that room was closed for a few years. Some kid hung himself there in 2014. Parents never came to claim his stuff. They only reopened it last year after the renovations. I stared at him, speechless. He nodded slowly. Weird thing, though. They never changed the student nameplate on the door. Still says E. Moore. Evan's last name. That night, I went back to Redwood Hall. I don't know why. Maybe to convince myself it wasn't real. Room 214 was empty again, the door locked. But in the soft light from the hallway, I could see something carved faintly into the wood just below the handle. I like things where they belong. The man standing in the road. I've always loved night drives. There's something peaceful about empty highways, headlights cutting through darkness, and the faint hum of the engine keeping you company. I used to drive long distances for work, deliveries. Usually, and night routes paid better. But one night in December 2020, that peaceful quiet turned into something I'll never forget. It was a Tuesday night, just after midnight. And I was driving through rural West Virginia on my way to deliver a small package to a client. The GPS said I'd reach the drop-off by 2 a.m. It was cold out, frost gathering along the edges of the windshield, and the road ahead was a long, twisting stretch of blacktop through the mountains. For the first hour, I didn't see a single car. Just the occasional road sign, the rhythmic flash of my high beams, and the sound of wind whistling through the cracks in the windows. Then, somewhere around 1:17 a.m., I noticed something strange. A car was parked on the shoulder up ahead, old. Maybe from the 90s, its headlights flickering weakly. I slowed down as I got closer, ready to offer help. But as I pulled up alongside it, I realized there was no one inside. The driver's door was wide open, the interior light dimly glowing. A pair of footprints led away from the car into the trees beside the road. Fresh ones, pressed deep into the thin layer of snow. I rolled down my window a little. Hello, you need help? No response. The wind howled softly through the trees. I sat there for a moment, uneasy. There was something about that open door that didn't sit right. I figured maybe whoever owned the car had gone to find cell service. Not unusual out there. Still, something in my gut told me to keep moving. I started driving again, glancing back at the car in my mirror until the red taillights faded into the dark. About 10 minutes later, my radio started crackling. Static, loud, sharp, filling the cabin. I fiddled with the dial, but it only got worse. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it cut out completely. Silence. That's when I saw him, a man, standing in the middle of the road about 100 feet ahead. He wasn't moving. Just standing there, facing me, perfectly still. I slammed the brakes, tires screeching on the asphalt. My headlights hit him full on, tall, thin, maybe mid-40s, wearing what looked like a dirty gray hoodie and jeans. His arms hung limply at his sides. I honked once. Hey, you okay? He didn't react. Didn't flinch. I rolled down my window halfway. Do you need help? Still nothing. The way he was standing, not waving, not even acknowledging the car, made every hair on my neck stand up. It was like he was waiting for me. I slowly pulled into the opposite lane, planning to drive around him. But as soon as my car started moving, his head snapped up. Not slowly, snapped. Like a puppet's head yanked by a string. I hit the gas. As I passed him, I risked one glance out the window. His eyes were wide open, too wide, and his mouth was stretched into this unnatural, almost frozen grin. Then as my taillight swept past him, he turned his entire body toward me, but his legs didn't move. I sped down the highway until my heart stopped pounding. The road curved and dipped, trees closing in again. I tried to calm myself, convincing my brain I'd just seen some drunk or drugged out local. But when I checked the clock, 1:31 a.m., I noticed something else. The fuel gauge, which had been half full, was now hovering near empty. I hadn't driven that far. No leaks, no smell of gas. Still, I didn't have a choice. I needed to find the next gas station. Luckily, about 15 minutes later, I saw one, a flickering neon sign reading Miller's Fuel Stop. It was one of those old 24-hour stations that looked like it. Hadn't been updated since the 80s. I pulled in, shut off the engine, and stepped out into the cold. The place was deserted. The lights buzzed weakly, and the air smelled faintly of oil and frost. As I started pumping gas, I noticed something carved into the side of the pump, scratched letters. Messy but legible. Don't stop for him. My hand froze on the handle. A chill ran down my spine. I looked around. The highway behind me was empty. Just a black ribbon cutting through the snow. I quickly finished fueling up and went inside to pay. The door creaked as I stepped in. The inside was dimly lit. A few aisles of snacks, a humming refrigerator, and a counter with a dusty register. A man stood behind it, thin, gray-haired, wearing a flannel shirt and thick glasses. He looked up as I entered. "You lost?" No," I said. "Just needed gas. You guys open all night?" He nodded slowly, eyes never leaving mine. "You came from up north?" "Yeah." He leaned on the counter. "You see him?" My throat tightened. "See who?" "The man in the road." I didn't answer. He sighed. "You ain't the first. Not by a long shot." I tried to play it off. Probably just some guy whose car broke down. The old man shook his head. "There ain't been a car up there in years. Not one that runs." "What do you mean?" He pointed out the window, toward the direction I came from. "Every winter, same thing. Somebody breaks down, somebody else stops to help, and then—" He trailed off, glancing at the floor. I swallowed. "Then what?" "They don't come back down." Silence. I paid for the gas, trying not to show how shaken I was, and walked back out to my car. As I grabbed the handle, I noticed something on the passenger side window. A handprint. Smudged. Streaked with something dark. Too high up to be mine. I got in, locked the doors, and peeled out of there. The old man stood by the window, watching me drive away. I tried not to look in the mirrors, but instinct won out. For just a second, maybe less, I saw something moving in the road behind me. A figure, walking straight down the center line, getting smaller and smaller as I sped away. By 2:10 a.m., I finally reached the client's address, a small house at the edge of a frozen lake. I dropped off the package. No one came to the door. And I got back in the car to head home. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. On the passenger seat, where I'd dropped the delivery receipt, there was a folded piece of paper that hadn't been there before. It was old and yellowed, edges torn. I opened it with shaking hands. Scrawled across the page in dark ink were 5 words. "You stopped for him too." I didn't sleep for 2 days after that drive. When I finally reported it to the police, they told me they'd go check the stretch of road I described, but they didn't find anything. No abandoned car. No footprints. Nothing. They said maybe I imagined it. Exhaustion. Bad weather. Isolation. Maybe. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving home and the road is empty, I still see him, just a figure far ahead in the headlights, standing perfectly still, waiting. The cabin that watched me. I've always loved camping in cabins in the middle of nowhere. Solitude, quiet, fresh air. It's like pressing pause on life. I've done solo trips before, but the one I'm about to tell you about still haunts me. I've never told anyone in detail, and I don't know why I'm doing it now. Maybe I just need it out there. It was late November 2019, and I had a long weekend off from work. I wanted to escape the city, so I rented a small cabin deep in the Allegheny Mountains. The listing promised complete seclusion and a true wilderness experience. Perfect. I drove up Friday evening. The sun was already dipping behind the trees when I left the main road for the gravel path leading to the cabin. The forest was dense, towering pines and maples, frost forming on the branches. My GPS signal was spotty at best, and after a few wrong turns, I finally saw the cabin, small, wooden, weathered, and sitting at the edge of a clearing. A thin wisp of smoke curled from the chimney. I pulled up and got out. The air hit me like a wall, freezing, crisp, and smelled faintly of wood smoke and damp leaves. The cabin was silent except for the wind whispering through the trees. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and dropped my bag. The interior was simple. A small kitchen, a wood stove, a loft bed, and a single chair by the window. It smelled faintly of pine and old wood, comforting in a way. I unpacked, set some food out, and started a fire in the stove. The logs crackled and sparked, and I settled into the chair with a cup of instant coffee. Outside, the forest seemed to stretch endlessly, dark and quiet. I checked my phone, no service. Perfect. By 10:45 p.m., I was in bed, reading with a small lantern. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. I could hear branches scraping the roof and the distant sound of something moving through the underbrush, probably deer or raccoons. Then I heard it, a soft knock on the cabin door. I froze, heart jumping. I told myself it must be the wind, but the sound was too deliberate. Another knock, this one slower, heavier. I whispered, "Hello?" Nothing. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously stepped to the door. No one. Just the dark forest, swaying trees, and the snow-dampened ground. I laughed nervously. "Yeah, just the wind," I muttered. Back inside. I locked the door and sat down, trying to calm my racing heart. I didn't hear anything else that night, just the wind, the fire, and the faint creaks of the old cabin. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke to a new sound, soft footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate. Someone walking back and forth. My stomach dropped. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear. Then the steps stopped. A long silence. Then a whisper, barely audible, coming from outside the door. "I see you." My hands went numb. My brain screamed to get out, but I was frozen. I grabbed the fire poker and slowly edged to the window. Through the frost on the glass, I saw a shadow, tall, hunched slightly. Just standing there in the clearing, motionless. I flicked on the lantern. Shined it toward the porch. Nothing. The shadow vanished. I told myself it was an animal, playing tricks in the dark. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave. By morning, the sun was weak and pale, but I noticed something strange. Footprints in the snow, circling the cabin. Not deer. These were human, large, and heavy. They stopped abruptly at the edge of the porch. I packed up quickly, telling myself I'd leave immediately. But as I grabbed my bag, I noticed the lantern had moved. Not tipped over, but shifted closer to the window. My blood ran cold. I had left it exactly where it was the night before. I got in my car and started down the gravel path. About 10 minutes in, I saw a figure standing in the clearing, at the very edge of the tree line. Tall, dark, unshakable. Watching me, I floored the car. My tires skidded over ice and gravel as I drove faster than I should have, heart hammering. The figure didn't move, didn't follow, just stood there, like a statue. By the time I hit the main road, I felt some relief. My phone had signal again. I called the police. They came out, patrolling the area, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone near the cabin. Just my tire tracks in the disturbed snow where I'd panicked and spun. The car trying to get back onto the road. I didn't go back. Not for months. When I finally drove by during the day, the cabin looked abandoned. No smoke from the chimney. The forest quiet. Too quiet, but months later I received a package at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a small wooden figurine, crudely carved, about 6 inches tall. A rough likeness of a tall man, hunched, with exaggerated arms and a blank face. Pinned to it was a note, "I watched you leave." Since then, I've never stayed in a cabin alone. I don't go into forests at night. Even now, when I drive past rural areas or dark stretches of highway, I check the edges of the tree lines. Sometimes I swear I see him, just a shadow, standing silently, waiting, and I know deep down, he's still out there, watching.